I love the Kingdom Hearts games for a lot of reasons, such as fantastic music, over-the-top action, an intricate story, and of course, the characters, including Organization 13. Organization 13 is a group of villains made up of 13 powerful nobodies, plus one clone, puppet, thing, whose goal was to recreate Kingdom Hearts so that they could regain the hearts they lost when they became nobodies. Well, okay, the organization's true goal was a little different from that, but the only members who knew about it were Xemnas and possibly Xigbar. The organization appears in multiple Kingdom Hearts games and is full of interesting characters. That's why I'm going to rank the members of the organization from the worst to the best. But first, a few ground rules. First of all, these are merely my opinions, which are probably different from yours. Second of all, I'll be taking into account what each member's somebodies, provided we've seen them before, were like. The only exception to this rule is Roxas, because of how different he is than his somebody, Sora. Also, I'll only count what fans had dubbed Terranort as Xehanort's somebody, since that's what form Xehanort was in before becoming a Heartless and a nobody. Yeah, like I said, intricate plot. Finally, be warned that plenty of spoilers for the Kingdom Hearts games follow. Now, without further ado, my ranking of the top 14 Organization 13 members. Vexen, the chilly academic, and number 4 in the organization. He's a creepy and arrogant genius who takes joy out of experimenting on the living, but is a coward who's not very good at combat. In other words, he's just another generic, stereotypical evil scientist. Not only that, but overall, his personality is bland to the point of being boring. Also, Vexen's elemental power is ice, which is cool, but the way he uses it is pretty bland. For the most part, he just tries to hit you with miniature glaciers and freeze you into a clump of ice. Now, this would be fine and all if there weren't other fictional characters, such as Jack Frost and Elsa, that have shown that control over ice can be used in much more interesting ways. Now, I understand that both these characters came after Vexen, but it still bothers me. And to top it all off, there aren't really any good parts about Vexen to cancel out the bad, other than the fact that he created Xion and the Riku replica, both of which are far more interesting characters than him. Luxord, the Gambler of Fate and number 10 in the organization. This guy's boring, plain and simple. Sure, he has a few things going for him, such as his cool goatee and using playing cards as weapons, but overall, he's pretty uninteresting. He's barely seen in the games, and when he is, he's usually just there to oppose Sora and his friends, make card and gambling references, or a combination of the two. Also, his boss battle isn't that great. It's alright once you know what you're doing, but the game doesn't really spend much time explaining how to fight him, even though it's so incredibly different from all the other battles in the game.
Do you know the rules?
No! But even if you have no idea what you're doing, it's not really that hard to beat compared to the other organization members. Also, much like Vexen, the way he controls his element, time, isn't very interesting. In fact, it's barely even used. It's for these reasons that he's so far down the list. Well, that and he introduced the world to sword, dice, and card forms, which is kind of hard to forgive him of. Larxene, the Savage Nymph, and number 11 in the organization. I think it's safe to say that Larxene's the most hated character of the franchise, and it's not hard to see why. She's one sick, twisted, manipulative chick. That said, she's not that bad. Her powers over lightning and remarkable speed are pretty cool, even if the same can't be said of her weapons, which are just a bunch of knives. Not only that, but as mean as she can be, I kind of pitied her as she faded away after being defeated by Sora.
No. No! I refuse to lose. To such a bunch of losers! I think I'm fainting? No, this isn't the way I won't allow.
It showed that beneath her cold and hard exterior, there's still at least a hint of vulnerability inside of her, and that perhaps she can be redeemed in later games. However, she still has her flaws. She's cruel and uncaring to almost everyone she sees, including most of her allies. She also seems to feed off of other people's pain and sorrow, and doesn't mind toying around and manipulating those she doesn't like, which is pretty much everyone. That and... yeah, let's just move on. XIII, the attacker-turned stalwart or silent hero, depending on which game you're looking at, and number 5 in the organization. XIII is the muscle of the organization, wielding a giant axe sword and earth powers, both of which are pretty cool, even if his elemental powers are nothing compared to the epic landscape and prowess of Master Xavier. As far as his personality goes though, there's not really much there. He tends to keep quiet unless he has something important to say, and can be cunning at times. But there's still not much in the way of personality, mostly due to how little he's been shown, with only rather brief appearances in every game he's been in. That said, he's definitely a character I want to learn more about in Kingdom Hearts 3. Don't let me down, Nomura. Marluxia, the graceful assassin and number 11 in the organization. Don't let the pink hair and rose petals fool you. This guy is lethal. He's smart, good at keeping his cool, and a plotting, manipulative little schemer to the very end. Sure, he's not the most original character, being pretty much a stereotypical power-hungry evil follower. Starsky. But he's still fairly interesting. His weapon, a scythe, is pretty cool too. His powers are impressive, considering they center around his elemental control over flowers. Although I've heard it argued that his element is actually death, which makes sense. You know, I wonder if he and Larxene would have successfully overthrown the organization if Axel hadn't interfered. Something to think about, I guess. Xemnas, the superior of the in-between and number 1 in the organization. That's right, the big bad boss of the Organization 13 doesn't even make it to the top half of my list. Now, let me explain myself. When it comes to strength and abilities, this guy is by far the greatest in the organization. From using weapons that look like red lightsabers, to falling headfirst down a skyscraper in battle, to doing this downright impressive looking move, Xemnas just oozes power when you fight him. Of course, power just isn't enough to make a character great. It also takes an interesting personality. Unfortunately, Xemnas has what is possibly the blandest personality in the organization. He just talks about Kingdom Hearts and other strange and usually cryptic things, which would be fine if it was interesting, but it isn't. Of course, he does fight you at the end of the game in a zebra patterned bathrobe, so I guess that's a plus. XIII, the cloak schemer and number 6 in the organization. XIII is a cruel, calculative tactician who would rather use his wits, magic, and his power over illusions over brute force any day of the week. And that's what makes him interesting. He uses a book as a weapon, which is rather unique, and tricks people with his illusions and manipulation, such as when he disguised himself as Sora in order to turn Riku into his Pawn of Darkness, and came pretty close to succeeding. Also, the reason he was, eliminated by Axel was because he was a rival of Syax's, the organization's second in command, which says quite a lot about his standing in the organization. And then, in Birth by Sleep, it was revealed that Pienzo, XIII's somebody, was a quiet young orphan who was taken in by Ansem the Wise and his apprentices. Overall, XIII's a fairly interesting character. But seriously, what was with his over-talkative, know-it-all personality and dream drop distance? Out of character much? Zeldin, Whirlwind Lancer, number 3 in the organization. Honestly, I think Zeldin is a really underappreciated character among the Kingdom Hearts fanbase. He fights with 6 lances at once, and his power over the Force? No, actually he controls wind, but I love the way he uses it. Instead of going the obvious route, having him use the wind to push away Sora and his friends and send debris flying into them. Nomura and Kingdom Hearts team went with the far more original route, having Zeldin use his power over the wind to control weapons in ways that would otherwise be impossible for him to do. However, there's more to him than just his skills in battle. Many may assume that his greatest strength is his fighting prowess, but it isn't. It's his silver tongue and brutal cunning. His goal in Kingdom Hearts 2 is simple: cause the beast to be consumed by his own anger, turning him into a heartless and a nobody that can be controlled by the organization. At first, he tries to achieve this through lying and manipulating the beast in order to turn him against everyone who cares for him.
It's time you dealt with Belle. She's scheming to take everything you have. This castle, your precious Rose, and then your life. Trust no one. Feed your anger. Only anger will keep you strong.
Once Sora, Donald, and Goofy cause his plans to fail, he decides to go a different route. Instead of subtly steering Beast towards the darkness, he blatantly threatens the 2 things Beast cares for most: Belle and the Rose. When that doesn't work, he tries to drive the Beast into a rage by fighting him, Sora, and the others. And of course, his combination of dreadlocks and mutton chops give him a pretty unique appearance. So, yeah. I mean, he's by no means the best member of the organization, but he definitely deserves a lot more credit than he's given. Xion. The title is Puppet and number 14 in the organization. Xion's easily the most controversial character in the franchise. Some people adore her for her kind-hearted personality and tragic story, while others claim she's a completely unnecessary and uninteresting character. I personally like her. Sure, considering how much attention she gets in 358 over 2 days, her role in the overall plot is pretty minor. But hey, a character doesn't have to be important to be good. As for not being interesting, I have to disagree. She's a deep, conflicted character who must choose between sacrificing herself for the many and continuing to live her fairly good life with her 2 best friends. You can really sense the inner turmoil going on inside her, and I really pitied her when her friends began to turn on her just for doing what she knows is right. Finally, her death at the end of the game was easily the most touching moment in the history of the franchise. Here's hoping they make her return in Kingdom Hearts 3 a good one. Roxas, the Key of Destiny, and number 13 in the organization. Roxas is a great character in almost every way. He can dual wield and has power over light, which is especially interesting considering that the organization uses both power over darkness regularly and has clearly dark motives throughout. Not only that, but Roxas, much like Xion, is generally kind to others, although he's definitely more dark and brooding than she is. He also cares deeply for his friends, and is willing to go to great lengths for them. His story is very tragic and interesting, and yet still manages to have a happy ending. The only reason he isn't even higher on this list is because he can be a little angsty at times, especially near the end of 358 over 2 days. Oh well, he's still a great character. Saïx, the Luna Diviner, and number 7 in the organization. First of all, Saïx's weapons and powers are pretty cool, especially when he snaps and goes into berserk mode. However, that's not why he's so high on this list. The true reason is his personality. At first, he seems like most other organization members. Cruel, manipulative, and on the surface, almost emotionless. but there's more to him than meets the eye, and that's what makes him such an interesting character study. You see, I believe Saïx is an excellent example of denial. My theory is that Saïx wants to become a somebody more than anyone else in the organization because he's absolutely convinced that he's completely void of emotion. He uses this to justify acting completely heartless to those around him. However, there are times when he can't control himself and goes into an emotional rage, which he probably rationalizes as having nothing to do with emotion later on. Because of Saïx being in denial of having a heart, he's easily manipulated by Xemnas. Combine this with his physical and mental excellence, and it's no surprise that Isa became one of Xehanort's 13 darknesses. By the way, how did he get those scars of his anyways? That's what I want to know. Demyx, the melodious nocturne, number 9 in the organization. This guy's proof that just because a character doesn't have a lot of screen time or role in the plot, doesn't mean they can't make a big impression. Demyx is generally laid back, cowardly, and lazy. Because of this, he's kind of a love or hate sort of character, and I love him. He's easily the funniest in the organization. Personality-wise, he's pretty much the opposite of Saïx. It seems to me that instead of being in denial about having a heart, he's deep down the most insistent about it in the organization, although many of his fellow members probably think about it as just denial about losing his heart once he became a nobody. That would explain why he's always so lazy and uninterested in the organization's goals, because deep down, he probably doesn't believe in them. What I'm really curious about, though, is how he made it into the organization in the first place. Either he does a lot more for the organization than it seems, or he used to be a much stronger-willed and courageous character than he is now. As far as combat goes, he's one of the weaker members of the organization, but he's still pretty cool. He controls water in interesting ways, summoning water clones, exploding bubbles, and a lot of water pillars in battle. Also, his weapon is a sitar, which is pretty unique, even if it looks pretty much like an electric guitar instead of an actual sitar. Whatever. It is a video game after all. Axel, the Flurry of Dancing Flames, number 8 in the organization. Man, where do I begin with this guy? Well, for starters, he probably has the most unique weapons in the organization, and they're surprisingly effective. His control over fire is pretty impressive too, if not very original. I mean, anyone who can do this is cool in my book. As far as his personality goes, he's probably one of the most complex, as well as most interesting, characters in the series. I mean, sure, he can be hard to read at times, and he's not afraid to get his hands dirty occasionally. But deep down, he cares deeply for his friends, Roxas and Xion, and would go to great lengths for them. And his character progression, from where he's introduced in Chain of Memories, all the way to the latest installment of the series, Dream Drop Distance, is outstanding, only rivaled in the series by Riku. And speaking of Dream Drop Distance, I love the way that Lee, Axel's somebody, can wield a Keyblade now. It makes him that much cooler. Xigbar, the free shooter, number 2 in the organization. He's the master of the Arrowguns, the king of wisecracks, and the drowner of goldfish everywhere. And of course, he's the one I based my scream name on in the first place. Xigbar is just one cool dude. His nonchalant, sarcastic demeanor almost never fails to entertain me. However, his constant taunting, combined with the occasional act of cowardice, makes Xigbar a love-or-hate sort of character, much like Demyx. And like Demyx, I'm one of those who love him. He's also important to the plot, having worked for Master Xehanort since Birth by Sleep, and being one of Xehanort's 13 darknesses. When it comes to fighting, Xigbar is probably the most original member of the organization. He wields a pair of twin Arrowguns which can merge into a sniper rifle and have deadly accuracy. He can also manipulate space, allowing him to teleport short distances, stand in midair, sometimes upside down, and in Kingdom Hearts 2, even manipulate the battleground. Sure, some people may find his fights annoying since it's so hard to get close to him, but I find him to be a refreshing change of pace and strategy. And to top it all off, he has one of the coolest appearances in the Kingdom Hearts series, if not in video games in general. In a world where fictional characters in their 20s or younger hog most of the spotlight, it's nice to see an older guy fight amongst his younger peers and still be more interesting than they are. I'm Captain Arrowguns, and please, please Nomura, don't let this guy die in Kingdom Hearts 3.
Me? I'm already half Xehanort.